Hey everyone, I'm Natalie Ivey, the host of the HR Investigations podcast, and I'm delighted about today's show because I have a special guest with me, Deb Muller. She is the founder and CEO of software company Acuity. Deb and I are going to talk some shop about the evolution of employee relations and investigations in the digital age, and Deb is going to share her experience and expertise regarding employee relations data and analytics. This is a must-listen episode for leaders in HR who are responsible for managing employee relations.
Welcome to the HR Investigations Podcast, exploring the issues, challenges, strategies, and solutions. Sponsored by RPCHR and hosted by Natalie Ivey, an HR consultant, licensed PI, and author of the best-selling book, How to Conduct Internal Investigations, a practical guide for human resource professionals. And now, here's Natalie.
Hey everyone, this is Natalie Ivey, and I am really happy to have you on my show today because I am super excited to have my special guest with me, Deb Muller. She is the CEO of HR Acuity. And what we have in store for you today is a deep dive into the digital edge in HR. One of the things that you've heard me say if you listen to my show is that we've got to get out of the 1990s in the way that we're managing internal investigations. And so I've asked Deb to join me today because she is probably the top expert on this because of the nature of the work that she does. And so I'd like to just turn it over to Deb. Can you share with our listening audience a little career bio? And then you and I are going to talk a little bit of shop about managing investigations today and getting out of 1990s.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Natalie. It's great to be here. As you said, I'm the CEO and founder of HR Acuity, and we are the only end-to-end employee relations and investigation case management system. And it was basically developed from my experiences. I spent the 90s, as you said, doing investigations. And then when I decided to start my own company, I just knew there was a better way. And, since launching our software in 2009, which seems like a really long time ago, the world has sort of just continued to fall on its head over and over and really just reinforce why I don't know how you can do good employee relations or investigations without, using technology right now.
Yeah, I completely agree. Completely agree. So, yeah, 2009. Wow. I mean, I can't even believe it. Yeah, that seems like just yesterday. All right. So let's talk a little bit about some of the things that are going on. I mean, from my vantage point and some of the things that I've been sharing, with my listening audience and that I talk with our clients here at RPC is, increasing case volumes. We're now a number of years out of the pandemic. The case volumes are climbing. We're dealing with a lack of adequate resources in some departments. And then also, this kind of 1990s strategy. It's just this Excel sheet here and a Word document there, file folders over here. And so, let's talk about that. What are some of the unnecessary risks for organizations and having this sort of kind of schizophrenic kind of strategy with all this different stuff?
Yeah, I do think back to sort of the 90s when we were doing investigations. I always said we were sort of like in the shadows, sort of it wasn't part of our regular job. It's what we stopped doing. I would actually applaud people when I learned that they were using Excel spreadsheets because I thought they were actually ahead of the game. But everything was extremely reactive. Nothing was attached to anything else. We did our investigation sort of in a vacuum. We packaged up our notes, however bad they were, and put them in a file folder in our drawer. And sort of it was just like, let's just hope something doesn't come of it. And if it does, maybe we'll know where to find the files. Maybe we won't. But we couldn't really put the pieces together to really say what's going on. What are really the indicators, the predictive indicators in the organization that we have a problem? How are we getting really to the root cause of what's going on? We were just waiting until everything blew up and having to deal with that particular instance. But that just doesn't work anymore in the age of technology. You can't really get by if someone says, gee, have you had similar incidents in your organization? You can't really get by with saying, I don't really know. I don't really know. It just doesn't fly in today's digital age. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally get it. Yeah, it really is about having kind of this digital edge and being able to get ahead of it. And I'm noted for saying in the HR community, the best investigation is the one you don't have to conduct, because
Exactly.
you get to the prevention part. But if we're not really compiling any sort of analytics on, like, historically, where are our problems? If we're not really looking at it that way, then it makes it very difficult for us to continue to go to that root cause. Like we can't get there. Let's talk about some of the reasons why. And from your perspective, I'd love to get your insight on the reasons why some organizations are really slow in this evolution away from the Excel sheets and not getting into the digital age here.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. And the good news is we are seeing that picking up tremendously. But if I think about where I kind of started and sort of to where we are here and kind of feeling, what was the problem? First of all, employee relations back when I started the company, certainly when I was working, was not a function. It was sort of something you did. It was a transaction. It was kind of like payroll, or maybe you did it sort of with everything else. It wasn't seen as strategic at all. The outside environment has really forced organizations to look at this strategically, many more organizations. And if you look at our benchmark data, which any of the listeners can download from our website, it really shows that most organizations, I think it's in the 90%, either have a centralized employee relations function now or some mixed model of people in the field doing work, but still sort of a COE doing things, because organizations have realized they have to get smarter about it. They have to get more reactive. And to your point about not waiting till investigations happen, I say that all the time. By the time the investigation has happened, a lot of shit has happened that either the company didn't see or they chose to ignore. And so if we want to get smart about this, we have to think of our incidents. I use the analogy of a traffic light, right? Yeah, green light is what we expect our employees to do, how we expect them to behave, all the guidelines. This is what we want, just like our machinery. If you do this, you hit all these goals, you behave like this, we're fine. That's not life. Humans are human. So what we really need to focus on are those yellow light incidents, not the red light, not the investigations, but what are those indicators that are going on, whether they're performance issues or policy violations or coworker conflicts or increases in issues in a certain location or with a specific leader. If we can start getting those indicators earlier and delving in to see, is it a policy issue? It is a cultural issue. We can really avoid, not all of them, it's not going to be perfect, but we can really start to get ahead of those investigations. And when we have the investigations, we'll have more information to properly resolve them.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, even in just, my business, and as you know, I've been running HR Acuity software with my company here for a number of years, and I almost can't remember what it was like before, Deb. Can't remember.
Right. How do you do it? The other thing is, as an investigator, just, as a practitioner, I know I'd go from one investigation to another or to every other thing I was doing, if that wasn't the only thing I was doing. A week later, I can't tell you a single thing about that investigation. I've forgotten about it. It's gone. So if you're deposed, if you have a legal situation come up later, if you're not even with the organization, where is that record of what's going on? How was that decision made? And I'll tell you right now, in today's environment, and I don't know if we're going to get into that, but now more than ever, right? Even as things change and we might think, things don't matter anymore. They do. How you handle a situation matters today. Who it was, why you made the decision, when you made the decision, what you did is going to be more critical than ever for organizations.
Absolutely. I mean, and we've seen, the expensive litigation. I mean, we've seen it. I've personally worked with some of the clients that we have who, have unfortunately had some, pretty significant consent decrees. And, these are painful,
Absolutely.
multi-million dollars. And so, that's the road that we don't want to travel down. But I think the other side of this too is, when we talk about employee relations, it's about our organizational cultures and staying true to that. And how in the world can we possibly do that if we're really just constantly reacting to a case and we just keep reacting? An investigation is very much that reactionary process is something that is broken. And, how do we stay true to that culture? And if we're really not doing that. So
when I first came out with my system, it was all about the investigation. And now really the investigation is a part, as you're saying, of a part of employee relations. It starts so much sooner. We have a speak up platform, right? How do we make people feel comfortable coming forward? Not just I've been harassed, quid pro quo, but my manager told a bad joke and I feel uncomfortable. What do I do? Right? How do we make them feel comfortable that that's the moment in time. And where I think our software is a little different because it makes them feel comfortable. It's not tell me what policy has been violated. Just tell me what happened to you and how did it impact you at work. And then we're also giving tools to managers because, quite frankly, HR can't do it all, right? The manager is the face of for the employee of the employer, giving them tools to respond, giving them tools to respond in this environment with things that are, mental health. I mean, there's so many things going on right now, political divisiveness. How do they deal with those things in real time? And then, of course, as things escalate, getting employee relations and HR involved. So it's not just the investigation. Again, by the time the investigation hits, you probably missed a lot of those indicators.
And kind of another step to that is I've personally worked with some organizations that are large that have dedicated employee relations teams, which we know now that the centralization of employee relations, especially in the larger companies, is really just paramount. You've got to minimize the bias if you are working cases, the ones that are of the serious level, those serious like red light kind of incidents you talk about. But one of the things that's also become problematic is in some organizations, the human resources department is really overwhelmed with a lot of stuff. And the moment that an employee raises something like, "My boss is harassing me," or they package up the complaint as a hostile work environment harassment complaint, well, immediately HR is like, "Oh, that's an ER issue." And they pitch it over the fence to ER. And also what has happened over time is some employee relations teams have just gotten crushed under the weight of the volume of all of these things that truly are not rising to the level of the seriousness of a formal case. And so there's had to be in some organizations a bit of a righting of the ship here so that we're getting clear on the kinds of issues that really warrant having a dedicated team like that investigating. So, but having the software to be able to look at this and calculate it. And I've worked with one organization, and when I asked the question, well, how many of the cases are you getting into your team, that ER team, that really are cases you don't own? Well, I'm not really sure. We don't track that. Okay, that's kind of the issue here. Like we're just taking a swag at it to kind of know how much we're dealing with, right? Yet, we're measuring things to within a millimeter in every other part of our organization, and yet everybody today is talking about engagement and culture and turnover and retention and all this stuff, and yet we're just not measuring some of the most critical things.
Yeah. Can you imagine some of our other functions, marketing, function, finance, not looking at predictive indicators? We have those predictive indicators, but the only way you can see them is start looking at them or benchmarking. So I just did a webinar, just released a blog on 10 KPIs in ER you should be tracking. Right? You should be tracking these to benchmark them against others. Most of them are in our benchmark studies. So you can look at, how you fit against other companies. Some are actually going to be in this year. We're adding some new, and they're not hard to do, but you have to start tracking them. How many cases per 1,000 employees? Is it good or bad? As a leader, we know no cases is not good. That's not good. Nobody's perfect. But I had 30 sexual harassment complaints last quarter or a year or whatever. Is that good? Is that bad? How are we figuring it out? So you need to have the data to do that, to start to have those predictive indicators in your workplace to see if there's an issue. And by the way, for those ER teams or HR teams that are overstaffed, a lot of our community uses the data to go and say, I need more staff. Mm-hmm. This is how many cases I had. And this is based upon how many resources we have. It's below the benchmark and we need help. So there's a lot of things you can do there. Also to show how you're trending. Are you actually saving the company money, which is really hard because it is cost avoidance in most cases, but you can look at things. So a couple of the indicators, again, have to be tracking, have to be using technology, is looking at what we're calling, legal cost per employee. So what's your outside legal spend, or however you define it, as long as it's consistent, per year divided by the number of employees in your organization. That will go down with good employee relations. Employee relations teams that deal with performance management, you can do the same thing. What's our cost of poor performance divided by the number of employees every year? And you can start to see the impact. It might not be all based on employee relations, but you can really bring that ROI in, which we know is so critical for getting any type of investment.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that kind of segues into how best can HR and ER professionals really kind of make that case for investing in software, right? So certainly some of the benchmark data, but from your perspective, what else can...
Yeah, we talk about the risk a lot, which is so important, but there's also this big element of trust. how are we building trust with our employees? We know that turnover is really expensive. We have some data, which I love and I cite it often. We asked employees, this was last year, about their experience at work. Had they been part of an investigation or not? And then we asked sort of the general, how likely are you to recommend your company as a place to work, sort of an EPS score. So in general, the score was about 41% overall. I'm sorry, it was 31%, which is pretty much in line with the Gallup. If an employee said they hadn't been involved in any investigation or things like that, it was up to about 41%. However, if an employee had an issue, reported it, it was investigated, and it was resolved, we did not ask resolve the way you like it or not, that number went up to 56%. So employees expect things to go wrong. It's how you handle them in a consistent way that is a difference. And Natalie, I always refer to my own, I call it the Nordstrom effect. Why do I go to Nordstrom? Why am I a very loyal Nordstrom shopper? It's not because of the clothes. They have the same clothes as a lot of other stores. It's because when things go wrong, if something happens with the piece of merchandise, if I'm having, I have to go to a funeral and I need someone to help me out in record time, I know they're going to put their arms around me and no questions asked, they're going to help me. And that builds loyalty, just like when things go wrong at work. If you do the right thing, if you help your employee manage through it, they will become much loyaler. And that's real money. That's real money.
Yeah, it absolutely is. Yeah. So, from my perspective, one of the things that I find is that a lot of times it really just comes down to just the cost. So, senior leaders will say to HR, well, why do we need to do this? Well, if this is expensive, well, what's really wrong with what we're doing now? We've been operating just fine, okay? And I find that a lot of HR professionals struggle with how to articulate the need, right? They've got to be able to influence that and explain what's not working for us now and what could this look like?
A couple of things that we've mentioned already, not being as reactive, also just thinking about a professional function, not having technology. Imagine asking finance to do their job without technology or marketing to do their job without technology. It would be unheard of. So I think there's sort of just a leveling the playing field and getting something that's bespoke for them. I think that a lot of companies are saying, well, we have this ticketing system, just use that. Well, a ticketing system is not made for the nuances of employee relations and HR things. So from a security perspective, permissioning, how the data is run and tracked, it's actually backwards in many cases. So that can actually hurt you. So I think that is it. Look, we have a very different workforce right now. There's a lot of eyes, our workforce, when they're not happy, they can go to social media. The brand reputation is much higher than it was in the 90s for sure. When, I don't know if you remember, Natalie, we didn't talk about race, religion, gender in the 90s. That was how we dealt with it. Just don't talk about it, right? Don't bring it to work. And in today's work environment, it's really important. We're seeing sort of non-traditional workers attempting to unionize when they're not feeling heard, when they don't feel like their organization has their best interests at heart. So there's a lot of different ways to really say, now is the time. How can we not be using it? I think is really the question. You're really hampering us by not giving us good technology to use.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you mentioned it earlier. You said, what if marketing didn't have KPIs? I mean, you wouldn't want to be
imagine
marketing to be able to tell the boss, well, hey, how did that branding campaign go? I think it was good. I guess it's okay.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Or just taking a swag at the number. Your CFO is going to look at you like, what is wrong with you? You can't come to the table without actually having some specifics. But yet here in HR, we're a little bit behind, and I think we've really got to up our game. But
and by the way, it is your most expensive investment as a company for the most part, right? Your employees are your most expensive resource, yet we're not investing in it from a technology standpoint to understand those behaviors. We do invest a lot in engagement, which is fine. We do a lot of surveys, but here's the analogy I always give. Hopefully my husband won't listen to this, but let's say I have a boyfriend, which I don't. Let's be clear. And I want to see how things are going. So I say, all right, I'm going to give him an engagement survey. Honey, what, 1 to 10, what do you think? He says, oh, you're a 7. Our relationship's a 7. I'm thinking that's not bad, right? I'm good. I'm going to go with that. Or I can start looking at his behaviors. He doesn't call me when he's supposed to call me. He's late all the time. He forgot my birthday. He's looking at other women. Now, in my 20s, I might want to sort of hinge my bets on that 7, but now I'm smart enough as I've grown that really that behavioral data is telling me a very different story than just asking someone a question. And so I think they're both really good, but you're really missing something if you're not looking at the behavior of your employees. How are they deviating from those green light expectations? And how do we get that equilibrium back? And what's our role to sort of help put them in the best position to do their best work and meet those goals?
Yeah, exactly. And I completely agree. I just had a conversation recently about employees complaining and struggling with like the anxiety. There's a lot of discussion today, mental health and anxiety. Well, when we really kind of dug into the issue, what is really the core issue? The core issue is actually job design. The problem is that you have an individual, the old saying, wearing a lot of different hats. Well, this was a situation where it was an ops manager who was truly pushed into wearing about 3 different hats. The guy was probably like an FTE and a half, at least. You know what I'm saying? And so the capacity in the job was part of the problem. Then also the fact that he was being pulled in so many different directions, he was basically set up to fail, and so then he has a boss where the boss is like, you're not performing, you're not delivering, and the boss is putting all this pressure on him. He goes to HR and is like, look, I can't stand it. I'm about to have a nervous breakdown. He just doesn't get it. It's like, okay. And now HR is listening. And then, of course, and I consulted on the case, but, the issue was really job design, right? Well, we are not necessarily going to know when someone just answers a survey and we can't get that granular with it, right? So I am right there with you. And I think that the other thing that really is important, because, so many organizations really need to be doing this too, is, really leveling up the skill set with their management group. I find so many of them just are woefully unprepared for supervising others. And so if you've got the data, if you've got something like, just pulling from the analytics, the dashboard in HR Acuity, and you're looking historically at what's going on, you could take some baseline metrics of like snapshot in time. Where are you right now? You do a really awesome intervention with that management group, and they really grasp those skills and they're applying it. And then you take a look at where you are 2-3 quarters from now, and you've seen a drastic reduction. Hey, there's your ROI for your investment in your learning and development.
Absolutely. We're seeing that a lot with our manager tool. In addition to having them like manage, they're dealing with things like mental health. They're dealing with things like the external environment, which is bringing its way into work and sort of causing conflicts among their workers. How do we really help them and give them the tools that we need? And then look at that data to see what else do they need ahead of time before it blows up? What time just-in-time training do they need? What are the themes that are coming through? How are we treating people equally across the organization, right? We should be, regardless of what's going on externally, we still want to treat people the same. So having that data that you wouldn't necessarily have before and really getting ahead of these issues.
Yeah, fantastic. So for me, in just being a user of HR Acuity and that of the other members of my team, it's just a couple of things that I want to share with the audience. Not only is it just the analytics. Now, for me, and I'm organized a little bit differently because we're different organizations. But what I can tell you is that it allows us to be able to go back and talk with our clients and say, hey, here's a trend, right? Here's what we're seeing. And let's talk about it. Let's get ahead of it. I have a lot of CEO chats where we do that. So that's helpful. But I think the other part is I get a lot of people who say, well, we really need to get some templates. And we're sort of married to like Microsoft Word templates. Look, I'm here to tell you, we need to get out of templates. We need to get out of the kind of 1990s strategy. Now, what I mean by that is you can have your templates all embedded in the software, right? I can do that for you. I mean, I've had businesses ask us to do it, and okay, we will build you a template for a statement of complaint, or we will build you a template for an interview. All right, but you're really better off. You have some things as guides, but when you have everything in one centralized portal, that's what's important. But I think the other thing that we have really got to keep in mind is business continuity. HR professionals, we can't be thinking about just right here and the right now. We have to be thinking strategically. What if you move on and you are in a completely different business division with your organization 2 years from now? And, litigation takes a long time. I mean, who knows? It could be 9 months from now. Or
yeah,
whatever.
oh, absolutely. That'd be quick.
You've moved on. And then what is your poor successor going to do? No clue. Nothing is no. And where is your evidence? Did you lose pieces of evidence? Oh, legal is going to be just serious.
It is all there. And then, you can tell through health scores where you have to lean in for some of your investigators a little bit harder than others and check at what they're doing. That is one of my favorite features, to see the history. It is right there, regardless of turnover or attrition. I remember my last job before starting the company, we had a gentleman by the name of Gary, and he was like the historian. So you'd be like, Gary, have you ever heard of, Ed Snow? And he'd sort of, you'd see the wheels turning and he'd say, yes, 3 weeks ago, Ed, or 3 years ago, something. First of all, Gary retires, right? Gary goes, Gary ever can leave the next day. You cannot, you can't go to court. Again, back to my initial point and say, hey, has this ever happened before? Has this person had a similar issue? And be like, I don't know. Maybe, but that person's gone now. We don't know. No, the company's liable.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you're really SOL if Gary leaves you.
Yeah. And by the way, also looking at how you treated people in similar situations, right? So someone makes a claim of whatever from a protected category to the EOC or whomever, and you're defending it and saying, well, no. Yeah, they were late, but we treated everybody who was late the exact same way. How do you have that information if you're not tracking it in one place? It's not just about the individual situation, but an aggregate. How are we doing that? And that can really, look, you were late. It wasn't because you were X, it's because you were late, and anybody who's late gets treated this way.
Yeah, so that consistency. The last point I want to make, and then we're going to go ahead and wrap up here for today's show. But the one thing that I think is really important, I get asked an awful lot as an investigator, the he said, she said, Natalie, and, the he said, they said, kinds of cases. All right. And they always say, well, how do you know if somebody's telling the truth? Well, here's the thing. You've got to be able to do credibility assessments. Well, one of the big ways that we are able to assess that is looking at case history.
Absolutely.
We've had somebody who has had eerily similar, like you have an allegation of harassment and let's say it was a manager, and within the last 3.5 years, you have had maybe 3 separate cases with direct reports. And each one of them, if you were to go back and look specifically at their complainant statements, you have eerily similar phrases and eerily similar situations. And let's say the previous 2 were not substantiated, but now you're dealing with a third one. These 3 complainants don't even know one another. What is the common denominator? You see, so this is a huge reason for me with why I really think we've got to get, into this digital age. I mean, for heaven's sakes, we're in this era of AI, and yet with employee relations, we're still kind of working with these outdated strategies. So
yeah, I mean, absolutely. And we're not looking for a shadow of the doubt. We're looking for sort of a preponderance of the evidence, right? So 50 plus a feather, and investigators who do not use their own credibility assessor, they're not doing their job. That is your job to do it. And, you have to do a comprehensive investigation using a process that you can go through to sort of make sure you're sort of checking those boxes is going to help you there. But it's very rare that you have something that's so he said, she said, and you typically can make some type of determination with good, intentions and good faith. If you're looking at things. And by the way, these days, there's always something on the computer or the phone. It's like this electronics help you a lot in those cases, certainly. So
yes, they do. So yeah, there is a benefit of coming out of the Friends era.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, gang. So the last thing I want to leave you with is that if you'd like to get some more information regarding HR Acuity and some of the resources that they have, which is awesome, they've got a really great website. That's going to be put into the show notes, and you'll have a link there where you can link it right back. All right. Well, I really want to thank you for joining me today, Deb. I know we've really delved into a hot topic here, and I know we've offered some really great value to our listening audience. So I want to thank you very much for that.
That was a lot of fun. I love talking about this. I'll talk forever.
I know. Yeah, we could hang out all afternoon. That'd be right. Get your margaritas to probably do that. All right.
Good idea.
Yeah. All right, gang. That's it for me today on the HR Investigations podcast. See ya.
Thanks for joining us today on the HR Investigations podcast. Be sure to subscribe, like, and share the show with any colleagues who will benefit from our strategies and solutions. For free bonus resources, simply visit hr-investigations.com. And remember, if you'd like some help with improving your investigative skills, or if your organization is in need of an external investigator to help with a case, please get in touch with us. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.